This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, where voting is open now for our annual Reader's Choice categories in the Best in Beer competition. Vote online now, beerandbrewing.com/best-2019. That's beerandbrewing.com/best-2019. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast for our special episode 100 of the podcast. It's kind of crazy that we've gotten this far in the history of this. We started this a few years ago, not knowing where we'd go, and here we are. And so I thought for this special occasion, we would invite our good old friend Neil Fisher of WeldWorks back for a few minutes here. Welcome to the podcast, Neil.
Thanks for having me again, Jamie.
We shot back out to Greeley. Later on in the podcast, we're going to cut into the podcast takeover that Neil and Cory King of Side Project recorded back in June while we were out at the Firestone Walker Invitational. It's a fantastic conversation, and it's a conversation that's only been available up to this point to our subscribers on the special subscriber version of the podcast. Speaking of Craft Beer and Brewing subscriptions, that's the way you can support what we do. So go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber to the magazine, and you can read occasional articles that Neil writes for us, although it's been a little while now.
I think we've got a couple Stout articles maybe a year ago, but maybe it's time to get another one on the books.
Maybe it's another time.
There's some good content out there if you're looking for hazy IPA or stouts or even the number 19 podcast.
Number 19 podcast?
Yeah, go give that a listen too.
Episode 19?
Episode 19, just Neil Fisher, but
you can hear all about how Neil brews Juicy Bits and conceived of that.
It's been fun to see how many people have connected with just that recipe since you guys published it. So more than 2 years now, I think. So, but it's been fun just to get feedback from brewers, home brewers, people that don't have any interest in brewing it, but just excited to see a recipe out there. So thanks for letting me contribute that.
It's pretty cool. So go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, support what we do. Like I've said before, it's kind of like a Patreon, but we just send you a magazine every 2 months. So cool benefits in addition to getting to listen to this podcast and supporting our ability to go out and have great conversations with great brewers. Couple more things before we cut into a conversation. Our Best in Beer issue is coming up soon. We're working on it right now. November 1st will be the Best in Beer podcast, which it's kind of crazy, but if we look back at the history of this podcast, last year's Best in Beer episode, which was episode 54 of Best in Beer 2018, is our second most downloaded episode in the history of the podcast. I don't know why. I don't know how anyone could listen to two editors talk about the Best in Beer for an entire episode, but hey, I appreciate that. Thank you all. That episode's going to drop on November 1st. The digital issue for the Best in Beer issue drops on November 1st and goes live out there in the app. And so that's we're working towards that now. We are tasting beers and going through our review process. If you're a professional brewer out there and you haven't yet thrown your hat in the ring, drop me an email, jbogner@beerandbrewing.com, jbogner@beerandbrewing.com, and is spelled out AND. And I'll put you in touch with how you can ship some beer out for us to consider for that Best in Beer episode, and for the Best in Beer issue, and our cool little trophies for the top 40 or so in our Reader's Choice, our Editor's Picks, and other kinds of categories. So it's a fun highlight for the year where we get to talk about all that's great in the world of beer. Super excited for that one. You guys have won a Best in Beer before, Neil?
We have, and I think it was before the cool trophy, so I'm going to have to ask for a print of that trophy one day. But no, I think it was Extra, or was it?
I think it was Extra, which was the top reviewed IPA in our IPA issue that year.
Yeah, which was crazy.
And that's kind of how we go with our Best in Beer.
Absolutely.
We try to taste these beers throughout the year, and the top scores in our issues around any of those subjects are automatically pushed forward and in that consideration for beers of the year, and that's certainly how it made it. But our blind reviewers tasted it, and it was the standout for them, and there it went.
Yeah, we're hoping to compete again this year, maybe.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. A lot of it's that portion of it is blind and up to the judges. There've been some very cool beers that we've tasted this year.
Awesome.
Can't wait to celebrate that.
Best of luck to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And since this is the 100th episode, I thought we'd talk a little bit about what you guys out there listening to the podcast are really enjoying about this. And because Neil's a competitive guy and loves talking about how well his episodes have performed. And did you tell him it was episode 19? Right?
Episode 19, if you want to go back and listen. Small plug for previous episode.
It's still in the top 10 of all of our all-time episodes. But it's been interesting and curious to see what brewers like to listen to the most. And currently, right now, our number 5 episode of all time for the podcast was episode 85 with Vinny Chilurzo, as Vinny talks about brewing IPAs.
Great episode.
Absolutely.
One of my favorites.
Episode 4.
What's number 4?
Trillium.
Yeah,
with JC Tetreault. Yeah.
All right.
And that one is, they are neck and neck, super close. And then the third most downloaded episode, and this is all time since the start of the podcast, was episode 71 with Sam Richardson of
Other Half.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You guys have brewed with them before.
Yeah, good friends with both those guys. Have a ton of respect for them, and I'm hopeful that one day I can pass their subscriberships on their episodes, though. So
you got some work to do. Maybe this episode will do it.
Episode 19.
Yeah, or maybe this episode will do it. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Those are great podcasts.
Second most downloaded episode, like I talked about before, is episode 54, our Best in Beer 2018 episode. Over 31,000 people have downloaded and listened to that episode, which is just mind-blowing.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Episode number 1 is, of course, the very first episode that we ever released. Not really surprising. People start listening to the podcast, they go back to episode 1. So Garrett Oliver is still in that number 1 spot.
Holding the 1 spot.
But over 36,000 people have downloaded and listened to that episode. So, hey, thank you all out there listening for supporting what we do, for listening and enjoying and continuing to come back and listen to these episodes. It's fun to be able to make them for you. It's fun to be able to have these conversations. It's fun to be able to hopefully contribute something to the world of brewing beer by sharing knowledge from great brewers out there.
I can speak for listeners because I love the podcast just to find out the latest and hear from industry peers. But it's amazing just the resources that you guys have connections with and just the wealth of knowledge that people are willing to share. It's unlike any other podcast I've found. So it's great to see a lot of technical stuff, which is great, but also just culturally and just kind of state of our industry and just getting to know the breweries and the stories behind them. So I thank Craft Beer and Brewing for letting me be a part of it, but also for putting out such great content. So if you're a fan of these podcasts, continue to subscribe.
Tell me a little bit about this episode that we're about to cut into, this conversation that you had with Cory King at Firestone Walker on Saturday morning before the festival started. Both of you guys woke up bright and early and met me despite being maybe a touch hungover from the night before and sat down, took the podcast over, had a fantastic conversation about brewing.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of fun because we both have, we have similar passions, and especially with barrels. I think that's something we're both very passionate about and spend a lot of time understanding and learning more about it. So it was fun to just kind of really ask each other questions. I mean, it wasn't like we were interviewing each other, but we were really having a pretty candid and honest conversation about different methods and techniques and a lot of stouts and a lot of kind of barrel discussions about other stuff as well.
Well, before we jump into that conversation, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft. G&D is committed to cold, whether you operate a brew pub or large-scale production brewery. Contact G&D Chillers today at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Mention this podcast and receive up to $1,000 worth of glycol with the purchase of any new G&D chiller. Also, Tavour makes it possible to access and discover the highest-rated craft beers from all over the world through the free mobile app. Twice a day, you get access to a new limited beer from an independent craft brewer. Imagine sipping a vanilla ice cream stout from Wild Leap Brewing in Georgia or Juicy Bits IPA from Weldworks in Colorado. Join the independent beer community today and get $10 in beer money with code BREWING. Juicy Bits, Neil.
Juicy Bits, yeah, Tavour. We've got a couple shipments of Juicy Bits out, and we hear from people all the time, like, when are you guys getting out there? We're trying our best to get more out, but Tavour's been a great partner. So
you got to make more beer, I guess.
I guess got to get more Juicy Bits out to the people.
Also, Hopsteiner is a vertically integrated global hops supplier dedicated to delivering the finest hops and hops products available. For 6 generations, Hopsteiner has partnered with breweries of all sizes, offering unique hops varieties and innovative hops products to enhance flavor, aroma, consistency, and flexibility for brewing and beyond. Learn more at hopsteiner.com. And balancing barley and hops is your expertise, but for Clarion Lubricants, food-grade lubricants is theirs. The team at Clarion knows that when it comes to making great beer, you're the expert, and when it comes to supplying food-grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, they're the experts. Clarion will work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps protect your brewery. To speak with an expert, dial 1-855-MY-CLARION, that's 855-692-5274, or visit clarionlubricants.com. Clarion Lubricants, the expert that experts trust. Neil, let's jump into this conversation between you and Cory as you all take over the podcast for this special episode 100.
Sounds great. Let's give it a listen. Let's talk about barrel-aged stouts. Let's jump right in.
Okay.
So I think what I've been most impressed with the way you guys approach, especially barrel-aged stouts, you have multiple recipes, different threads that you use for blending. How do you guys approach that as far as, because you obviously use different barrels but you have different malt bases for these different recipes. How are you guys incorporating those kind of, what's the approach to, okay, we want a wheated stout or a,
Yeah. I think when, there's more than one ways to make an imperial stout, and part of the nature of our brewery is experimentation and writing new recipes. That's the most fun for me, writing new recipes. So we write a bunch of different stout recipes to play with them in unique barrels. When I first got into making barrel-aged stout, it was one recipe in one type of barrel at the previous brewery I worked at. And from that, we would still pick out barrels that were exceptional, barrels that were behind, and it kind of just like a eureka moment. Like, well, you know what? What if we started actually doing, slight tweaks, slight different variations of these recipes, and then doing different barrels, and then trying to match the barrel to the recipe from the get-go. There's a couple recipes that we know the barrels they work on the best, but even then, my wanting to always tweak on things, we're always just getting different barrels in and trying new things, and the more pieces we have, the better beer I think we can make in the end for blending purposes, and that's how we've developed all of our stouts. That's why we actually say they're blends, if you will, because it's a blend of separate recipes. We don't sit down and you can't walk through a warehouse and find beer barrel time barrels, or derivation barrels. They have different names on them just for the names of the recipes, so we can just make the best blend in beer possible later, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a really inspired approach to it. We've always kind of we started off the opposite, where we had that same recipe as Medianoche, and it was continued to evolve as age and all the other things that we changed. But now we've kind of taken more of an approach where, okay, let's pair like you said, the malt bill in particular can be complementary to the barrel. So if we know we're going into rye barrels, we've already got a good lead on ones that can be freshly sourced. Let's incorporate. We typically use a lot of chocolate rye, but let's incorporate some caramel rye or some other, some rye malts. Same with wheated bourbons.
Yes, 100%.
I haven't had a lot of wheated stouts. You guys, I know, use some wheated stouts in some of your blends too, and I think that's a totally different mouthfeel and really texture than what you see like with a big oatmeal stout.
Yeah, for most of our stouts, they all have a really heavy dose of oats, and what we do for our wheated stouts pretty much just cut the oats out. Well, no, don't cut it out. There's still a couple bags. I just can't get away from oats. I think oats are in every recipe we write all the time. I don't know why. One of my favorite malts for some reason, but we just really lower the oat percentage and then just take that in with wheat, if you will, malted wheat on that, and we're talking usually about like a 20% malted wheat beer on our wheated imperial stout, and then that digs into some of the base malt. And fortunately, wheat, we get actually more points out of wheat, sugar points. So it tends to be a really efficient brew for us. It actually is not too bad. With our oversized mash tun, we don't have a problem with it. So I have a question for you, actually, I guess, as well. So have you, as you said, you started with like a recipe that's kind of evolved, but have you ever taken maybe that recipe and brewed it just different ways, i.e. like, let's have the same recipe, but we decide on this batch we're going to mash way different temperature, or on this batch we're actually going to go 3 gravity points lower to start, or 3 gravity points higher, to maybe just see what that recipe does in different areas?
Yeah, it's kind of happened by circumstance more than anything, because with an overnight boil, the times can range from 32 to 38 or 40 hours. And so we'll inevitably have a batch, our most recent batch we knocked out right at 40 Plato, but the batch prior to that was closer to 36, 37. And so it's the same recipe, same process, same mash temps, just ends up being a different boil time. And so we've actually seen now that those barrels do age very differently, even though they are the same, three Plato difference. Has made an impact on what we can use that for blending. Some of those bigger starting gravities, we couldn't do them as a single batch. They're just too big. Whereas some of the ones that attenuate further, the same problem, they're not big enough. And so having more of those threads to be able to blend has been great. But now we're talking about, okay, let's not let's not start over from scratch with a brand new recipe, but let's take that existing recipe, because it's been, we've improved upon it, knowing that now our target's 18 months on average. So we've made those kind of recipe adjustments to go that distance. But what happens with a higher mash temp? Attenuations are going to be where they're at. But what kind of overall impact on age and really mouthfeel? That's kind of, I think, always what we're striving for, is how can we just get that amazing mouthfeel without cloyingness? And that's, I think, the balance a lot of us are trying to strike.
Yes, I think that's maybe one of the misconceptions, even with what's going on right now, is the fact that final gravity isn't all mouthfeel. Your final gravity, if it's too high, it can be straight cloying, and there's just unfermented sugar in there, because fermentation's the other key to this whole thing. Being that we make a lot of barrel-aged stouts, I'm sure you're the same way. People bring by some pretty hyped up barrel-aged stouts for us to try, and it's always fun to get one and go, oh my gosh, this is so sweet. I'm going to take a gravity reading on it. I want to see what it is. And it's like, this beer's 19 Plato. Do you know what I mean? Like, this isn't fermented out, and to some that's mouthfeel. And I think there are consumers coming around to that going, man, that's just sweet. That's just unfermented sugar. And so that's something that we strive for too, is mouthfeel, but fully attenuated beer. But still, don't get me wrong, the final gravities are relatively high. But we know that, our yeast is done. It has done all of the work it needs to do, and there's no cloyingness behind it. And, throwing it in a barrel helps too. Aging and blending all those, the impactful, the oak and the bourbon and the booze, kind of pulls that back too. But I think that's one of the misconceptions. So right now is people are just going out and making, beers that finish at 18 Plato and say, look, they're thick. Like, no, but it's not firm. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's something that I think that's what separates a lot of when I have a lot of the barrel-aged stouts amongst the ones that people bring by, for sure.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right that I think we've looked at mouthfeel as, okay, start really high gravity. I think that's what people assume when we talk about a 40 Plato starting gravity, is like, oh, it's just to leave around a lot of sugar, which is inevitably going to be part of that. But mouthfeel is such a bigger part than just what the final gravity is. And like you said, you don't want to be cloying, and that's where I think, like oats, that's we've gone 25% on stouts that we really want, especially fresher stouts, that we want just this amazing mouthfeel without that cloyingness. And I think trying to think through more of like the impacts of the grain bill, and like you said, fermentations. I think mash temps, all those things are I think as big a factor to mouthfeel as final gravity, and then how you strike that balance. And that's kind of where our age comes into play for us. Is I think the thing that we've always noticed on our barrel-aged stouts, especially after packaging, after it's 17, 18 months in the barrel and then we package it, a year later, it's still pretty bright kind of barrel character. It's got, really nice viscosity, but the mouthfeel is starting to diminish in certain ways. And it's always that, I think, the challenge for people that want to sell their barrel-aged beers, in particular barrel-aged stouts, is mouthfeel is probably, for me, the first thing I noticed the grades.
That's interesting.
And so we've been trying to figure out how do you maintain that? How do you improve your mouthfeel over time? Because I think that's, I don't know, we've had this ongoing discussion of what does age impact in particular, and there's that oxidation reactions that are happening. Sugar's different, but mouthfeel for us is a tough one.
That's an interesting point. I haven't experienced that with ours, like loss of mouthfeel with time. And that's something that I'll actually, want to watch. Like the last beer barrel time we did was some of the best mouthfeel, I think, of any beer we've done. And so that's something I hope to, I've saved enough of it to drink over the next 10 years and kind of actually, you have to think, we've only been making barrel-aged stout really for like 5 years. So we still don't even have the knowledge of maybe like a Goose Island, you know what I mean? That has barrel-aged stout in their library that's, more than a decade old. So I haven't quite experienced that with ours, but mouthfeel is the first and foremost thing I think that we shoot for. We shoot for chocolate, Sure. I don't like dark fruits in my stouts. I don't like the European-esque, hopping rates and the fermentation profiles of those. So I go clean chocolate and bourbon. But mouthfeel with, like you said, oats. I think we can almost probably put ours are all imperial oatmeal stouts. Yeah. But another thing that we do, that I was thinking of while you were talking was, so we have those recipes and we will play around with our starting gravities, and then we'll inevitably have different final gravities, as you mentioned. And what we do in all of our barrels have the final gravity written on them, and then what barrel, because we face them backwards, and then we write what barrel was on the front and final gravity. So we can later even test the theories of, is it a barrel that's adding mouthfeel? We've definitely discovered that it's not all final gravity. We have beers that have a 15 Plato final gravity that have less of a mouthfeel than one that actually finishes at 12. It's and those are talking fully attenuated beers, at least, and lack of sugar. So it's something that we're still playing with, and it's one of the reasons we have so many pieces. So when we do like a beer barrel time, we're really blending for flavor components and mouthfeel, and then after we blend, we'll actually go back and take a gravity of the blend and see where we are, as opposed to using that gravity as blending. But it's definitely educational for us to see that, look, just because the beer finished at 12 doesn't have anything to do with the mouthfeel in the long run, depending on the recipe, the barrel, the age in the barrel. So that's something that maybe other brewers will take to heart. Like, it doesn't have to be 17 Plato finisher, buddy. Like, you can drop that down and still get the mouthfeel with other things. A water profile. We're very fortunate. We have amazing stout water in St. Louis. It's very, very good and easy to work with. But little things like that, I think that because the beers are so intense and over the top, that almost other brewing practices get thrown to the wind sometimes. People are just trying to jam it down its throat, like, overload the mash tun, boil it forever. But like, let's think about the things as brewers too, like our water profile and increasing efficiencies, or maybe in our malt structure, and our final product as far as fermentation profiles, what yeast we're using and making sure it's fully attenuated, and pitching rates, hopefully it's properly pitched, and then aging after that, and still minimizing O2 contact, all those little things. But some people, I think, it's just such a massive, just huge beer, and that's the world we live in right now, and craft beer is just big and bold and bad, that there's still nuances to these beers that we're trying to achieve. We're still trying to execute these as well as we execute our 4% grisette, and I think that in the long run will help manage and maintain kind of which direction we're trying to go, I think.
Absolutely. And I think touching on the finesse of, it doesn't sound like a style that is really, caters itself to finesse, and kind of, maybe stepping back a little bit and saying, what if we do attenuate more and still maintain mouthfeel? And that's, for us, we've even noticed changes in the same batch, same gravities, but, where they're stored. And, similar to bourbon, it's that same, we see those lower barrels, like on the bottom racks, a little bit cooler, a little bit less fluctuation, a little less extraction, to be honest. So the ABVs end up being a little bit lower because we're not evaporating as much, and maybe a little bit less barrel character. But the mouthfeel is always better than the ones on the very top, on the fourth or fifth, top of the rack. And that's where we've tried to figure out, okay, what if we just did a top rack blend of all different batches, but they're all the top rack of our barrel room. So I think those kinds of, like, getting to know your barrels and getting to know how your stout ages in those barrels is something we've really spent a lot of time on. I got a question on barrels in particular for you. So, and probably like us, you guys work with a variety of brokers and distillers, and trying to source, a mix of complex and varied barrels. If you had to pick one barrel to use for the rest of your life, that was all you could use, what would that barrel be?
Oh man, I could probably narrow it down to two, but one would be, I'm very fortunate to have a really good relationship with a friend of mine, Drew, master distiller at Will at KBD, and so it would definitely be his bourbon barrels. It's great now too that some of the bourbon barrels we're getting from him is his juice stuff that they've been making there now. I think they're on like 7-year-old stuff now. Anything older than that was bought in because they're relatively just kind of getting ramped back up and going. But I love Willet. It may be more of necessarily like a relationship base. I can go down and hand select. I can go down and talk to him, and he could be like, man, the whiskey from this batch, and you can pull the lot numbers, and we get the barrels that match that lot, are like, awesome. And that's that little extra touch that we can apply. We're not an IPA brewery, so I don't fly out to Yakima and rub hops, but I can drive to Kentucky and pick barrels. And when I talk to people about it, they're like, oh, that kind of does make sense. Like, this is what we do. We do the same thing you're doing for flying out to get hops. I just go to Kentucky. I talk to these guys. So It'd be Willet bourbon for sure. And, we've made tweaks to recipes to actually batch the barrels as opposed to, because I just love working with them and have a good relationship with them. And some of our best beers have come out of those barrels now. And that may be just from the extra little attention that we're putting in, I'm not even with our wine barrels, I really don't like using brokers very often because they're trying to sell me something. And it's like, man, if anytime you're trying to sell me something, I like to be the guy saying, no, I want to buy something. I want to pick. So the brokers, we really don't go through very many brokers. I have one that I trust down in Kentucky, but that's because I've toured their place and handpicked stuff. But it'd be Willet bourbon first and foremost, and then it would be Weller 12-year. Weller 12 barrels are awesome. You guys
those
can
laying
have
around?
Yeah, I got lucky. I got some recently. I have been bugging my one broker that we do mess with. For more than it was about 2 years, and remember that. Well, that's our collabs in that.
Oh, that's right.
We brewed a beer specifically. Neil and I brewed a beer specifically for rye barrels, and when I called to order the rye barrels, because I wasn't going to drive down to Kentucky for these, because I knew exactly what I wanted. They were like, "Hey, by the way, we finally got those Weller 12 barrels. Oh, I'll take those. I'll take them." And I was like, "How many do you have?" And I just bought all of them, so nobody else can have any. I didn't even have beer to put in all of them. I just got them, and then I started filling them as fast as I could.
You don't ever pass up on Weller 12 barrels.
But those barrels are awesome. We have a wheated Imperial Stout recipe that our original derivation blend number 2 is a single recipe, if you will. It's a blend of 2 barrels, but it was a single recipe beer, wheated Imperial Stout. And we matched that with a wheated bourbon barrel. And it sounds silly, but at the same time, it turned out perfect. One of those matches. So for you, I know unfortunately you're not as close to Kentucky. You can't just hop in the car and drive down and back. Yeah, I know. but do you have a favorite distillery or even brand that you like to work with? I know we're really not allowed to talk about brands sometimes. Some of the distilleries don't like us telling people, but.
There's a couple in Colorado that are great and they're blends, so that the barrels have different origins, which is actually kind of nice for us. Because they'll source and then they'll also do their own distillate, and so we get a good kind of variety from those. The Willet barrels actually that we got after we brewed together and then able to get in touch with them, they're aging really well. They're probably some of the best within 6-8 months that we've had of anything we've done. I think consistently my favorite have been Heaven Hills, Pikesville or Rittenhouse rye. Just that 4-year and 6-year rye. We typically go after some of the older 7 to 10 year barrels that people are mostly blending, whether it's MGP or some other stuff. But those are just we like the character we get out of them. They're getting harder and harder to find, and the prices are going up. But the 4-year, Rittenhouse from Heaven Hill, we've gotten a few different brokers and even some new sources lately, but those have aged really, really nicely, and now we're starting to cater. Okay, we're not going to go overboard with the rye because there's so much great kind of rye to those barrels, but incorporating some kind of complementary malts for that specific batch, and then we can kind of have an ongoing rye medianoche that's it gives us blends too if we're not going to do a straight rye. But it's been really fun to do that and focus more on the rye character, and then incorporating some adjuncts that play well with that. So if I had one barrel, not being close, Laws, we do have some barrels from Laws down in Denver, and they're doing some really fun stuff, and some 3 and 4 year, some bottled and bond. They're definitely, I think, on the upward swing of now they've got more age and they've got some more. We've toured their place a bunch of times. They're awesome people. So they're probably our favorite in state from distillate produced in Colorado. But Rittenhouse or Pikesville are probably my favorite.
That's cool. I used a lot of Rittenhouse at the last brewery I worked at, and that's all we used, actually, Rittenhouse rye. So anybody out there wanting to get into rye barrels, Rittenhouse rye is a great one. They're so easy to work with. They're always fresh because they're younger too. We use for rye. We use Rittenhouse and Willet exclusively for rye. We actually have a beer today here that's a vanilla and rye, and the rye blend was Willet and Rittenhouse. I'll have to bring over some. So I guess going back on that, even, do you have preferred age of barrel? Not even just varietal, but actual age for your beers.
Yeah, we I think we kind of kept moving the target. The target was always just 12 months. That just seemed to be closer to industry standard for the stout in a barrel. And now that we've been getting a variety of ages, we're starting to see that, okay, we can go 18 months, we can go 20 months. Beyond that, in the same barrel especially, we start getting in, I think, extracting tannins that we don't love. Sometimes they're nice because they do add a different character to the mouthfeel, especially. Sometimes it's detracting, but sometimes there's a balance there from tannin.
but we found that, like, the older the barrel we get, it seems like the shorter, the longer we have to go to get some of that character. But we also start risking that, the 7 to 10 year barrels have some fantastic spirits character, but they don't have a lot of the oak left. The oak has already been extracted and it's already gone out in the spirits, so you still get some of that left in the the Devil's Cut that's still in those staves. But some of these fresher, I think we just filled some MGP we had sourced, 4 or 5 year MGP high rye, I think was the mash bill for that one, and it's just amazing how much still oak, vanillin is in there, all those like coconut lactones and all these really bright oak characteristics that sometimes the bourbon doesn't take all that away. And so that's, I think for us, has been kind of like what you mentioned at the beginning, is just having more options to blend with. I think we haven't produced anything that's gone less than 16 months in a while, and I think we're actually going to do that soon because we have some barrels that are maturing much faster. And just based on the age of the barrel and also the gravity of the stout, or how long that stout is, we have gotten, I think, better about just overall brewing practices. So the beer is not needing as long to condition, and that's kind of what we've used the barrel for sometimes, is like, it's the same conversation we have with people all the time. They ask about Medianoche in particular, like, when are you guys going to do a non-barrel aged version of it? And it's never, because we designed it for barrels and for age. And I think the age component is something that we've now tried to dial in, is, not just knowing it's going to go into barrels, but knowing it's going to be served 12 months at minimum from when it is brewed. And there's some changes there that we're trying to get better about. Like you said, oxygen is such a big factor for acetaldehyde, and trying to make sure we have barrels that now we've gotten better. We almost never come across it, where some of our older ones, like, well, it just never came. We just too much oxygen, too much time without the proper kind of either blanketing or other things to keep those barrels fresh and not so much oxygen coming in. But after 18 months, it's inevitable. So just trying to protect them as much as possible. That's been, I think, an ongoing kind of challenge, but also something we're getting better at.
Nice.
So
we for us, like, we do similar to you. We just brew. We use a lot of different aged barrels, if you will, like from I've had as young as 2-year-old barrels, all the way into, God, I think we did a 35-year-old Heaven Hill barrel one time. That was the Blue Label, like a Japanese whiskey. Actually became the same batch that the most recent Goose Rare was in. And I hated the barrels. There was nothing in them. It was just like adding splinters to beer. You added oak. It was like you just added the stereotypical oak, because if you can imagine, all the beautiful parts of the oak were in the whiskey. It sat in there for so long. And then not only that, a lot of the inside of the barrel after that long was just sitting in air. There wasn't actually even whiskey touching the oak anymore. After evaporation, you have to think it's going to be a decade where the top half of that barrel is just sitting, just wood in air, because of the liquid level is just, so low by that time. So something that we found, it is nice to have a blend, of younger and older, but older is not better at all, I don't think. And some of my favorite things we've ever done, Derivation Blend 3 was a non-adjunct stout, and it was 2-year-old rye barrels from Willet. And God, when they're young like that, they don't leak. They're, you know what I mean? Yeah. They're tight. They're just, and with that, you have to think there's less O2 exposure. There's less O2 ingress. You know what I mean? There's a lot more of the vanilla left in the oak. A lot more of a lot more of everything you want from the oak, because the bourbon hasn't stripped it yet. It was such a short time. So having those pieces is really good for blending, and I like that idea of, like, maybe just packaging like a top level, because of I'm assuming your warehouse is ambient. You let the temperature. So does it get cold in the winter and hot in the summer? Or
Colorado's got pretty extreme. The one thing that's consistent is our humidity. So that we are always evaporating more off, especially water. But I think our barrel room. We got 2 barrel rooms now. One is probably ranging as high. It'll get it in the hundreds, probably in their ambient. Maybe just under 100. Maybe like 90, 95. Yep. As cold as 30, 25, 30.
Real cold.
With that low moisture though, the swings happen throughout the day too. So so the barrels stay pretty stable. The temperatures in the barrel are not fluctuating quite that high.
It takes a long time.
It does.
It takes a long time to move a room full of liquid.
Yeah,
it does. So
and we do like that age, and we've talked about down the road, do we do some climate control to give us a little bit more? We get to control how those age, but. There's something I think nuanced and kind of there's something very romantic about this is the season that bourbon is experiencing all that as well. Okay, this is a really, really extreme summer or really cold winter, and they have different extractions from those barrels. So I really love that, that sense of place in time with that specific. Okay, this was a really hot summer, and these barrels, maybe the cost is a little bit on the mouthfeel, but the barrel character is so amazing. But we can blend some of that back into it too.
Yeah.
So it's been fun just to see how barrels age over time and change.
I haven't. We move our barrels around too much, I think, but so I haven't really ever gone across a whole top row. But then they're all different recipes and all different barrels, so I wouldn't have a lot of good data, if you will, to see if we're seeing that much variation. But our room is our warehouse, which we do our bottle conditioning in as well. So it never gets cooler than 65 in there, just for bottle conditioning. And in the summer, we don't have AC in there, but it's an interior warehousing space between two others, so it never gets really above 85.
Right.
And as you mentioned, it takes forever to warm. We have over 400 bourbon barrels filled. It would take forever to warm all those up in that room. But there is some slight up and downs over time. But with one of those, our process was more out of just what we could do as opposed to me sitting down writing, I want my barrels to age from 65 to 85 degrees. You know what I mean? It's in our bottle conditioning warehouse, so that's just what they do for us. But yeah,
it seems to be working very well though.
It's okay, as is yours though. You know what I mean? It's fun that there's no right way or wrong way to do all these things. There's just different ways, and then our your ability to pull the beer from the barrels when it's ready and blend and then produce a packaged stable beers. That's the other part of the art. You know what I mean? That it's hard to give yourself credit for that, but Neil's touches on that beer too. We can talk about barrels and recipes all day too, but Neil's touches on that beer and that quality too. So.
Yeah, and I think the blending of stouts in particular, obviously, with mixed culture beer, that's pretty. It's essential, but I think it gets overlooked at how important blending is to produce a really good. I mean, we love doing single barrel projects just because it helps. It's kind of like a time capsule. This is at 14 months. This is where this batch was, but I can't imagine. I'm trying to think through all of our single barrel. We've done draft only, probably 10 or 15 at this point. Just single barrel Medianoche. Just take it out at this barrel this time. Do an adjunct or not. And none of them have been any better than the blends we do. And obviously, smaller, it's harder to get, so sometimes Untapped doesn't reflect that. It just reflects rarity more than actual flavor.
Of course.
But we do a bigger, 6 to 8 to maybe even 9 barrel blend, and we can really, then we have so many components to work with, and we can get it dialed into exactly what we want. We just have enough, options and enough variables to be able to control that. And that's a tough. I think it's the same with almost any, even spirits too. Single barrels are fun because they're different. But when you have 6 to 10 components that you can kind of blend with, I think I don't think a lot of people are as intentional as you are about blends with clean beer and stouts in particular. So I think it's really cool that you guys do that and also create new recipes for those blends. Yeah,
it's a blast to write new recipes. You know what I mean? It's just let's see what this does. I mean, not one thing we've ever done is perfect. So something somewhere could be better. So it's let's try to find perfect, which is there's no it's not possible, but it's fun. Let's make a little tweak, and then honestly as well, when we came and did our collab, that was a batch. However, when we come back later for the final, a majority of that batch will be what we brewed. But if it needs to be blended back with something else, we can always have these pieces. We don't have these orphan barrels because everything's an orphan in there. So we're never held to. My hand's never forced before I walk in there. I can always walk out of that barrel warehouse knowing that I blended the best thing we could do at that moment. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's not that batch is okay. Let's just bottle that whole batch. It's no, because there is no batch. It is all pieces that we can put together of a puzzle. So that I think has really helped. Just honestly just make it fun and keep it interesting for me as well as a brewer and see that whole project evolve on that side. And when I have friends in like you and anybody else when they come over and we brew stouts, it's kind of fun to go pull nails and okay, here's the same recipe but from this barrel. Okay, and now this is the same recipe brewed but 3 Plato lower, and it's oh man, it's educational every time I go in there because I honestly cannot remember everything we have in there. So I have a massive Excel spreadsheet with notes all over it, but without that, I would just be probably just another barrel-aged stout producer. You know what I mean? It would just be these batches. But every year, I'm an old wine guy, so I like the idea that every year is a new vintage, and that vintage it's one thing, the vintage date batches. It's like, well, you're brewing almost the same thing every year, but for us, it's truly a different blend. Every year will be slightly different, or maybe drastically different, depending on what we thought was the best at the time. And as a wine guy, I love that. I don't need 5 years in a row of a wine that tastes exactly the same. I just have 2 bottles of one of the year. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want them the same all the time. So for me, at least, and so I love that always evolving and changing thing with our hope thing. But it makes it labor intensive. When we go over to blend, it takes me, Tommy, and Brian a better part of a day or two now. Pull nails, samples. Then we're on PCRs on everything, and then talk about the blends. And let's be honest, like, we're sipping on 15% beers. It's hard. Like, people are like, oh, whatever. No, but we, by lunchtime, it's exhausting. We're just like, I don't think I can do any more of these guys. Like, we've had like 50 samples, and my palate is wrecked, and I have a buzz, and like, I think I need a break.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's part of it too. People take for granted. It's like that is part of what we're doing, and you don't get the same experience if you're spitting it out. You got to swallow the beer to taste it. So
I think you kind of touched on it too. I think something that we have similar approaches to is that there's not a date that's okay, we're releasing this on it's not on the calendar a year in advance, 6 months in advance. It's pretty much when it's ready. So how do you guys determine, okay, obviously there's logistics that play into some of those decisions, but how do you guys determine when it's it's time to work on a blend? Do you guys, keep kind of track of what's getting mature and, okay, this is getting closer and now we have enough? What's your guys' process kind of for knowing when it's time to package something?
It is definitely that when things are coming to maturity. Once we got our newer location and really, really grew our barrel program, we are just now kind of starting to see that fruition to where, like, we're having a majority, not a majority, but a very large number of barrels come to maturity. So we are now at the point where any given time, and the only stressful part now is you'd hate to miss, the window. You'd hate to have these beautiful beers and then not get to it for 3 or 4 months and be like, oh man, that was a little bit better, just a couple months ago. And that's something too people need to learn. It's not, there's not an indefinite to this. 40 months will not taste better than 30 months. Or it may not. You know what I mean? It's there is a timeline for these things, and there are peaks. So that's something that we try to watch. We've got a pretty good grasp on, everything of ours. We like to have like a minimum of 18 months in oak. Just over, with our experience over the years, that's something that I found that I like with our recipes, our barrels, our processes. Those beers hit my palate better that way. So we just did like an 18-month to a 28-month blend on the last one, and it tastes, really nice. And so that's something we're watching. When I can look at my spreadsheet and it's by date, and I can see barrels that we've already emptied, and I leave the ones we haven't, and see the pieces and how old they are, and that piece we used for derivation 11, so I already have an idea what the rest of the barrels are probably going to taste like, depending, where they probably are before I even go over to the warehouse. And then when I go to the warehouse, I kind of have like a list of what I'm hunting for, because they get moved around, unfortunately, so much that they're not in order. So it's a lot of digging, but that's mainly our process. Another thing too is we just did a derivation release last weekend, and we sold the whole batch out on site, just on-site consumption. And so now that it's gone, it's like, well, I guess I maybe want to start working on another one. Yeah. And it's a long process for us. Even if I were to start on it now, we won't see it for probably 3 months or so, just because of, as we mentioned, blending, that time commitment, then running PCRs on everything. We run a PCR on every barrel, and then we run a PCR on the blend, and then we run a PCR on the bottles, and then we do incubation to maintain, our quality, and just making sure that if you're buying a $50 or $60 bottle of stout from us, there's no worries. So that takes a while, you know what I mean? And it makes me way more comfortable with our releases too now. So that's something we'll actually probably start looking at now. Like, I have mature barrels, and I need to start thinking, honestly, beer barrel time is one that we do release every Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, since it's a blend and not there is no set brew day for the batches, and we just brew throughout the year and then come back and blend. So we know I'll probably pick barrels for beer barrel time here soon, earmark those, and then around outside of that blend, pick barrels for like maybe a new derivation or something like that, or a new shared barrel aged out. So that's kind of how we work into it, and it's whatever production allows us to do too. If we have we have one jacketed bright tank that's large enough for our batches, and we have one non-jacketed bright tank, and that's for our funky stuff. So if the non-jacketed one isn't being used for an IPA or a shared beer for a week or two, we can, hey, let's go get this stout ready. Get the barrels pulled over out of the warehouse. Let's get it racked. Let's get everything run on it. So production kind of helps us too a little bit, and that's one of the nice things we just don't have. Only Beer Barrel Time tells us when it has to come out, and so we just start way early on it.
That's awesome.
And for you, so you, like you said, you don't have a media noche day or something like that. It's just kind of whatever you think you need to do.
Yeah, I think we jumped around the whole calendar. The only time we've been consistent year to year is GABF. So similar to I think Beer Barrel Time, to where now we've got it's going to be a blend, and we always have something that's mature enough. But we're also at this point, I think we have enough stock that would happen. But if there wasn't beer that was ready, we would just push it off. It's I think it's a different approach. It's more like what you guys are saying, is that you're not constrained by, okay, we got to have this beer out on this date. Obviously, for the crowds coming for GABF, that'd be ideal. It's just a great time for us to do a release. But if we just taste through what we think is mature enough and it's just not quite there, or just not what we want, we'll do a different release. And we kind of have done same approach. Okay, we start tasting them, we start keeping track on them. They're getting closer and closer to maturity. And it's time to start coming up with the blend and then working on whether we adjunct it or not. And so that's, for us, I think, is getting, we had that same target, 18 months is kind of in the back of our mind. And that was really an evolution from the 12 and just tasting it. And it was kind of this idea that as long as we keep tasting it and it keeps improving, we'll move the target forward. So our initial goal was 12 months, and that first, filling 7 or 8 barrels the very first, month we're open, you're tasting them way too often and you're way too anxious. But once you get more inventory, you've got some stuff you can just kind of, 12 months, we don't even taste them. We don't even pull nails. So we don't even have a nail in them until probably 12 months. And I think we need to be more cognizant of the fact that maybe 18 months is, like you said, maybe it could be shorter or longer, and not necessarily having that target, because we move that target based on, we could just kept seeing more and more, the flavor was better. The extractions were amazing. We were getting really complex barrel character out of those that went past that 12-month mark. And I think we need to just be more cognizant of everything is up for debate. There's no rules right now for us. And that's, I think, when we do our best work is when, we go in with kind of a blank slate each time, and what are the best barrels. That's kind of the first approach we take, is what are the best, most, if we're ready to do a blend, let's say we have 20 barrels that are all getting closer to maturity. What are the best ones out of this group that would fit a blend, and then let the adjuncts be determined based on those flavor profiles. We're not going to go in a whole different direction than where, we're not going to try and match it exactly, but what adjuncts would complement that well, and we don't make those decisions until after we even determine what's mature. And I think it's a unique approach that you guys also have. That intentionality piece is so important, and I think you can only do that when you don't have constraints of, okay, we got to have this many bottles ready on this date.
Yep.
And they have to be this adjunct, this variant. We do coconut medianoche fairly often. We've done, I think, 2 batches now packaged, and we've done some different vanilla ones. But it's not like an annual, okay, ready for coconut. Like, these barrels didn't have a lot of coconut expression, so why would we push it in a direction it's not willing to go? Yep. So that's I think, for us, that's what excites me, is just every time we go into the barrel room and pull nails and taste through stuff, it's like, it's everything's on the table. Whatever you guys want to, wherever we want to go with this, everything is up for, we can go longer, we can go 15 months, and it's great, and let's just do it. So I think taking those rules out of the equation helps, I think, be a bit more intentional. So
I guess we should segue into adjuncts. I'm sure people are going to talk about adjuncts or hear us talk about adjuncts.
How much time do we have, Jamie?
Let's see here. We got 20 more minutes.
Okay.
10 more minutes. 10 more minutes. No, something like that. Yeah. So, the world has been flipped upside down on adjuncts all of a sudden.
I think we're on the opposite ends of the table, literally and figuratively sometimes. But
yeah, I think so. But it's fun. One of my favorite early barrel aged stouts ever was the original Goose Island, the coffee bourbon county stout, and to think that a coffee stout, that's not a pastry stout or even considered an adjunct. And so that's where my mind always started with our stuff was like coffee. And then it came into when I worked at Perennial, Abraxas was one of my recipes, and that was Mexican chocolate inspired. So I've always had, like, for adjuncts, more of like a baker's approach, if you will. a chef can just sprinkle salt, but a baker has to be very legitimate with all their additions, in order to get bread and dough to rise and do, there's a lot more like very precision to it. And now we have like people coming in and like, I love your pastry stouts. Like, I don't make pastry stouts. Stop it. I don't make pastry stouts.
We brand ours pastry stouts.
I know. So this is good. So with adjuncts, I mean, what are you trying to do? What is? Are you just trying to create something new, something delicious? Are you taking components from the barrel and trying to exhibit those? Are you trying to enhance those? Are you trying to play off of those? Are people just saying, I want a peanut butter and jelly stout, and you're just like, let's do it? You know what I mean? Like what? And I don't even know if I just threw that out there.
We have made a peanut butter.
Oh, okay, have you?
So, yeah. You could probably throw out something ridiculous, and we've probably tried it. So
So what is I guess adjunct to you, or even your processes behind it?
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people. That's one of the questions I get is, how do you do coconut?
Right.
How do you do your adjuncts? So I guess, Neil, whatever you would like to share.
Yeah.
You may not want to share all of it, but what would you like to share about adjuncts?
So I think we have two different approaches. I think like you said, the more of the baker's approach of, being really, I think, meticulous and a little bit, to be honest, more restrained. That's the approach we take with Medianoche. So the variants we do of adjuncted Medianoche are really more on they're adjuncted stouts. They're not pastry stouts, and we don't brand them that way. We'll occasionally do like a small batch for anniversary. We did a birthday cake just for fun, Yep. But we don't ever package those. The ones, and we want to make sure that if we're going to do a big release, or even something that we're going to share it somewhere else, we want to make sure that those are, I think, complementary. So that the adjuncts are really based on the expression the barrels have. Obviously, coconut and vanilla are probably the two we use the most, but we're always looking to, chocolate, coffee, spice, cinnamon, or cacao is something that we don't use as much anymore because our barrels seem to get a little bit more roasty. Our stouts are way less roasty now. We've dialed back some of the roast character almost to get closer to a porter than true, stout, and that's why we've kind of backed away from cacao. But we've also now got a different tweak to the recipe that would allow more chocolate expressions, and so that's our approach with Medianoche. And then we just source as needed for vanilla is the hardest. I mean, like all of us know, it's the price is astronomical, and we charge more for it accordingly. Mm-hmm. The market seems to bear a little bit more on vanilla, but not quite what the difference in cost for vanilla to coconut is just
Mm-hmm.
That's why a 5 pound per gallon of coconut is manageable, but a pound per barrel of vanilla it's probably about what most of us are doing, but it costs significantly more.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that some of those logistics are playing a factor. A lot of what we can buy from nuts.com, that's always just peruse the nuts.com website. What can we get in bulk, and what's the price there? Sometimes it's a budget, that we'll literally go and like, okay, we can spend $3,000 on adjuncts on this batch and still get to a reasonable price point. We try not to make that the concern, but there's some realities to, if we're going to charge a certain base price for this bottle, for us, we can't go to a certain extreme on the price end and still have customers seeking that bottle out. So we're always cognizant of that, but we don't want to diminish what the beer could be. That's the other reality. Is if it needs $5,000 worth of vanilla, then we'll go in that direction. But we don't want to do it just for the sake of extremes. We do plenty of that on the non-barrel aged side.
Okay, cool.
We'll do some extreme fun projects, and most of those are just driven by a sense of fun, really, and nostalgia. I think we really want to do things that harken back to childhood. We did the PB&J. We've done PB&J kettle sour now at Berliner, and that was just a couple extra pouring that this today. And it's such a unique beer because the stout, obviously, there's that just inherent chocolate character to it, which is fun, but sometimes gets in the way of like you want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's kind of this idea. So that's what inspires those, and we do. Admittedly, we have fun with it, and we've been called gimmicky at times, which is not completely inaccurate, but we do it with an intentionality, I think, that is unique and that most people don't understand.
Yeah.
Even something like Spaghetti Goza that we did at JBF that was kind of, it was a fun, we wanted a beer that people would talk about, whether they hate it or just enjoyed it. But we wanted to do it well, and so we figured ways that we could incorporate local, produce and work with local farms to get fresh oregano, fresh basil, fire roasted tomatoes, and make this. And really, those beers are inspired by not just like, hey, we're just trying to kind of poke the bear a bit, we really, that was truly inspired by a GAPF beer that I judged my first year judging. It was just, I don't even know who it was. Obviously, it was blind. Just a fantastic tomato goza, and this idea of like a savory character.
Yeah.
So they're born out of something that's more than just like, hey, this would be a great marketing beer. Obviously, we lean into those sides all the time because they're fun to market, and some people just, I think, get a little bit too caught up in. I mean, I think what we do is really, I think it's really well executed, and I think that's what is surprising sometimes when we have something outlandish, like a peanut butter and jelly, Berliner. A lot of dismissive, like, this is no way it works, but peanut flour worked surprisingly well. I think I was even a little bit skeptical that we pulled off. So that's kind of the approach. We don't want to diminish the I think the quality of what we're producing, and that's always the line we toe. Is we don't want to just go so outlandish that people can't take us seriously, and we'll get that sometimes, but I think we do it in such an intentional way and typically pretty well executed. On the barrel aged side, it's a little bit less of that. There's not, we're not going to do a lot of pastry medianoches. It just doesn't seem to fit, because then those get distracting from, a 4% kettle sour. The base beer is not, there's some really good ones that are just the base, Berliners and Gozas that we've seen in the last, decade in the U.S. and now are awesome. There's some really great ones, but ours is designed for some fun. I don't think we've ever just released just our straight Berliner. We always do something with fruit or with some adjuncts now. We now call it a pastry sour. We have a pastry sour series that's, raspberry cobbler we're pouring today as well. It's kind of inspired by, a bit more of a dessert take on a approachable sour. Yeah. So that's our approach to adjuncts. Yeah. For you, I know you guys are, like I said, we're on opposite ends of the table, but it sounds like similar on the barrel aged side. So when you guys approach adjuncts, is there an idea that you have in mind, or is it kind of the barrels, or are you complementing? Are you trying to do some contrasting blends?
Yeah. It ends up being more so whenever we go over and pull barrels and do blends, finding, the barrels that are mature right now are just, exhibiting tons of coconut or just tons of chocolate or, vanilla or coffee even. They kind of speak to us more often than not. We approach adjuncts, I take such approach to make, to be as all natural as possible with all of our beers. I think there's nothing that we don't do that's just, as natural as possible. So with our adjuncts, we only use real tangible ingredients, coffee, hence the reason we have very limited adjuncts we've actually used in stout. It's coffee, vanilla, cinnamon, cocoa nibs, coconut flake. I think that's maybe it. Orange peel in one of our stouts. That's it, so you won't find us doing a lot of graham crackers. I guess you could still buy the graham cracker, but the graham cracker itself is made of other things. You know what I mean? So maybe use those actual ingredients. But so we've always taken, especially for derivation, I've always taken a very baker's approach to making sure that the integration of the ingredients, the harmony of them, that they are put in at certain percentage rates to complement each other. It's not like, well, I put 3 ingredients at the same amount, just whatever. We've thought about these things and played with them over time and understood their impact and how aggressive they are. And vanilla and coconut make a beer taste sweeter, and cinnamon and coffee make it taste drier. And things that you can play around with as far as even mouthfeel at that level. The beer's already done, and you can still either pull mouthfeel up or sweetness down with just the adjuncts that we're using. So we've with derivation, and we've always been very, very, and once again, just one of the reasons it takes so long to make these things, and we have to think our way through every last bit of the process. And then with being all natural ingredients, it's infection points, which is always just terrifying. We have a beer that's been in barrel for 28 months, and let's throw raw coconut in it that we know is infected. So trying to get these adjuncts clean into the beer cleanly, making sure the beer stays clean the entire way too. Now with Shared, so our other brand that I co-own with our other 2 brewers, that's a whole other story we could talk about. But with Shared, making barrel aged stouts, we have a lot of stainless that sits empty because we don't need to be brewing, or barrel aged beers. We don't need to be brewing oak aged beer every day, refilling oak all the time, because these beers need time to mature. So with Shared, we use our stainless to make IPAs. IPAs are amazing yeast starters for our stouts. That's one of the reasons we started making IPA, was the 2 brewers, Brian and Tommy, love IPA and wanted to make them, but at the same time, I needed the yeast for side project stouts, which it takes a lot of yeast to make these monsters. With that though, with Shared, we've done a couple non-barrel aged stouts, and unintentionally maybe tiptoed in the pastry realm. We did a coconut stout called Coconut Vibes. Coconut, to me, I thought was an ingredient kind of like vanilla. I just don't know if you could ever put too much in. Well, you can definitely put too much coconut in a beer, in my opinion. The consumer's opinion was they loved it. I thought it was a little heavy-handed. And unfortunately for us, like, we didn't have more stout in tank in process to back blend. But everybody that tasted it loved it, and so we went with it, and it turned out, we brought it today, and it is definitely tiptoeing in the pastry land. But we did a barrel aged version of that, and actually used less coconut in the barrel aged version to let the barrel still come through. But we thought we got a great coconut profile still out of the beer. I preferred the barrel aged version, but then we ended up having people go, well, I don't get the barrel because the coconut's so great. It's like, well, you can't have both. You know what I mean? And so that's something we've been playing with Shared, maybe kind of seeing the extremities, seeing how extreme you can get, maybe before you fall off the edge. It's not something we want to really do. It's just we kind of fell our way into it with Coconut Vibes. But yeah, for derivation, it's always very, very thought out. All of our adjuncts are purposeful, if you will, and natural. And we add, I guess, if people want to know about process, like, we add our adjuncts as late in the process as possible. So we're talking, finished beer in like a bright tank, or I bought a Grundy and had it retrofitted to be like a recirculation tank. That's amazing. It's like 300 gallons, so it can fit about 300 pounds of coconut. So per usage. So we can whip the beer through the coconut, pump it back into the tank, open up this tank, pump it back in the bright tank, open up our Grundy, dig all the coconut out, put fresh coconut back in, purge, do it again. So when whip the beer through the coconut. So we used to be held by whatever ingredients we put in the bright tank once it's sealed up and closed. If you didn't add enough, you can't really add more. The tank's got beer in it. So we've come into some processes of like how to be able to add it externally from the tank. So we're actually recirculating through it to get a full extraction in our extraction. But we have found that the later you add the ingredients, the more vibrant and fresh they are. They don't age well, and I think maybe that is part of even adding it later. If we would have maybe added hot cider pre or in barrel and let it sit for a year or 2 years in barrel, you maybe have it so integrated that it might stay longer in bottle, but then it's not as fresh and vibrant, and maybe you could do both, but that's tough, So we package beer when it's ready to drink, but I get it. People are going to age it, and that's fine, but it's on them as well.
Sure.
But yeah, that's something we found is with processes, the later you add it, the more vibrant and fresh it is, and if I'm going to put $10,000 of vanilla beans in something, I want it to be vibrant and fresh and right now. So that's been our process. But with that, I think we've talked about stout enough.
I think we're out of time. I think we got to go pour some beer.
I think we got to go to this festival, actually, more than anything. So,
Cory, it's great to chat with you and take over the podcast.
Yeah, this is great. Jamie just sat here and watched us the whole time.
I know.
I was kind of creeped out a little bit, but no, I'm joking.
We'll put him on the hot seat next.
Absolutely. Neil, good talking to you. I'm glad we
Cory.
could talk some things.
And that's going to bring to a close this special 100th episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. Neil, thanks to you and Cory for sharing that podcast takeover and a fantastic conversation about brewing barrel-aged beers.
Thanks for letting us take over and share it with the entire subscribership group for number 100.
If you play your cards right, maybe the numbers on this one are going to give you your competitive spot in the
Coming
top
after
5.
the top 10. So.
All right. G&D Chillers sets the standard on quality, service, and dedication. Tavour makes it possible to discover highly rated beer from all over the world. Hopsteiner delivers the finest hops and hops products available. And Clarion Lubricants is the expert at food-grade lubricants. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Like I said before, if you enjoy what we do on the podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on that subscribe button. We'll send you 6 issues a year, including articles from folks like Neil right here. And we've got you on record now saying you're going to write another one.
I am. And I've got the pick 6 in the most recent one.
And you do have a pick 6 in the
the
Stout issue number 35.
Subscribe to find out who I picked.
If you subscribe now, we will send you that issue, as a matter of fact.
Find out what will be my pick 6.
We'll be back next week with a brand new episode 101. And my guest on that podcast is John Laffler of Off Color Brewing. Until next week, cheers.
Cheers.